When the ruthless patriarch of the Romano crime family picked up his private line in the dead of night, he expected trouble, but not the panicked voice of a terrified waitress. Her trembling report that his only heir was currently bleeding to death on a grimy city sidewalk ignited a violent chain of events that would ultimately tear the entire city apart. The rain in New York City doesn't wash the streets clean, it just makes the grime slick. Celia Jace pulled her thin, faded trench coat tighter around her shoulders, keeping her head down as she hurried down West 46th Street. She had just finished a brutal 12-hour double shift at Mel's Diner on 9th Avenue, and the ache in her arches was a dull, rhythmic throb. All she wanted was to get to the 50th Street subway station, catch the C train, and collapse into her cramped studio apartment. But as she passed the dark, narrow mouth of a service alley near an abandoned laundromat, a flash of white caught her eye. Celia stopped. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, menacing shadows. She squinted through the torrential downpour. Huddled against the rusted grate of a storm drain was a small figure. "Hey!" Celia called out, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain hitting the pavement. "Are you okay?" No answer. Celia's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct told her to keep walking. This was Hell's Kitchen in the dead of night, and getting involved usually meant getting hurt. But the figure was too small. She cautiously stepped into the alley. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she gasped. It was a little boy, no older than 7. He was soaked to the bone, wearing what looked like a customized Dalton school blazer, though the expensive wool was currently ruined with mud and something darker, blood. It was pooling from a nasty gash on his forehead, washing away into the city drains. "Oh my God," Celia breathed, dropping to her knees, heedless of the filthy puddle soaking through her jeans. "Hey, sweetie, wake up." The boy groaned, his eyelashes fluttering. His skin was ice cold, tinged with an unnatural, sickly grey pallor. He tried to push himself up on his hands, but his arms gave out instantly, sending him face first back into the wet concrete. His breathing was shallow and ragged. "I can't. My legs," the boy whimpered, his teeth chattering violently. "I can't feel my legs." "It's okay, I've got you," Celia said, panic rising in her throat. She fumbled in her pocket for her cheap prepaid phone, intending to dial 911, but the boy suddenly grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "No police," he rasped, his dark eyes wide with terror. He reached into the inner pocket of his ruined blazer and pulled out a sleek, heavy smartphone, the kind that cost more than Celia's rent. He pressed it into her hand. "Call Papa." "Only Papa." Celia looked at the cracked screen. There was no passcode. Just a single contact listed on the home screen. Papa. She didn't have time to argue. The boy was losing consciousness again. She hit the call button and pressed the phone to her ear. It rang only once. "Speak." A voice answered. It wasn't the frantic voice of a worried father. It was deep, terrifyingly calm, and carried a weight that made the hair on the back of Celia's neck stand up. "Oh, hello," Celia stammered. "Are you this boy's father? I found him in an alley off West 46th. He's bleeding, and he says he can't move his legs." There was a dead silence on the line. For a second, Celia thought the call had dropped, 5 miles away, in the soundproofed VIP room of the Onyx Club. Vincent Romano froze. The heavy crystal tumbler of bourbon in his hand stopped midway to his lips. Vincent was a man who traded in fear and control. As the undisputed head of the Romano syndicate, he had enemies in every borough, But the golden rule of the New York underworld was that families were untouchable. "Who is this?" Vincent asked, his voice dropping an octave, instantly silencing the 3 lieutenants sitting around the poker table. "My name is Celia," she said, shivering as the rain pelted her back. "I'm just a waitress. Please. Your son is hurt really badly. I think he needs an ambulance." "Do not call an ambulance," Vincent commanded, standing up so abruptly his chair crashed to the floor. "If you dial 911, you will not live to see the sunrise." "What is he wearing?" Celia blinked, stunned by the threat. A navy blue blazer. It has a gold crest and a monogram on the pocket. L.R. Leo, his son." Vincent's chest tightened, a rare spike of raw adrenaline hitting his veins. He signaled his men, who instantly drew their weapons and headed for the door. "Listen to me very carefully." "Celia," Vincent said, his tone turning into cold steel, "you are going to stay exactly where you are. Keep him warm. Hide him from the street. If anyone approaches, you scream. My men are exactly 4 minutes away. If my son dies, or if you run, there is no hole on this earth deep enough to hide you. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered, a tear mixing with the rain on her cheek. The line went dead. Celia dropped the phone and quickly unbuttoned her trench coat, wrapping it tightly around the shivering boy. She pulled him against her chest, pressing her hand against the bleeding wound on his head. "Your dad is coming," she whispered, rocking him slightly. Leo looked up at her, his vision swimming. "The man with the silver cane," he mumbled deliriously. "He pushed me out. The big black car." Before Celia could ask what he meant, the screech of tires tore through the night. 2 massive, armored black Chevrolet Suburbans jumped the curb, blocking the alley entrance completely. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, the streetlights glinting off the suppressed firearms in their hands. A giant of a man with a scarred jawline. Tommy Bell's Bellucci marched toward them. He didn't ask questions. He scooped the bleeding boy out of Celia's arms with surprising gentleness. Celia stumbled backward, raising her hands. "I just found him, I swear." Tommy looked at her, then motioned to the second SUV. "Boss says bring the witness. Get in the car. Lady, now!" When Celia hesitated, 2 of the men grabbed her arms, hauling her off her feet and shoving her into the leather-scented darkness of the vehicle. The doors slammed shut, locking her inside a world she was never meant to see. The drive was a blur of neon lights and heavy silence. Celia sat squeezed between 2 silent men smelling of expensive cologne and gun oil. She didn't dare speak. Her mind was racing. Who were these people? Why didn't they take the boy to Bellevue Hospital? The SUVs descended into a private, subterranean parking garage beneath a towering glass skyscraper on Central Park South. Celia was pulled from the vehicle and marched onto a private elevator. The stainless steel doors slid shut, and she watched the numbers climb dizzyingly fast. When the doors opened, Celia stepped into a penthouse that looked like a modern fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sweeping, rainy expanse of Central Park. The floors were imported Italian marble, and original artwork hung on the walls. But Celia barely registered the luxury. Her eyes were drawn to the center of the massive living room. The room had been transformed into a makeshift trauma center. A man in a tailored Brioni suit stood with his back to her, watching a silver-haired doctor work frantically over Leo, who was laid out on a leather surgical table. "His blood pressure is plummeting." "Vincent!" "Doctor," Aris Sterling muttered, adjusting an IV line. The head wound is superficial, a mild concussion, but the paralysis, it's not spinal trauma. The man in the suit turned around. Vincent Romano was strikingly handsome, but it was a harsh, predatory kind of beauty. His dark eyes were like black ice, and his jaw was set with a tension that threatened to snap the room in half. He wore a Patek Philippe watch that caught the light as he crossed the room and stopped inches from Celia. Celia shrank back. Up close, the aura of power radiating from him was suffocating. "You're the waitress," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Celia said, her voice shaking. "Celia Jace. Please, I don't know anything. I just saw him in the rain." Vincent stared at her for a long, calculating moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a dossier. Her name was printed on the top. In the 20 minutes since her phone call, he had already pulled her entire life apart. "Celia Jace," Vincent read smoothly. 24 years old, no criminal record. You work at Mel's Diner and clean offices on the weekends. You are currently $70,000 in debt to Mount Sinai Hospital for your mother's chemotherapy treatments. You have no boyfriend, no close friends, and you live in a shoebox in Queens. He dropped the folder onto a glass coffee table. "You're a ghost. A desperate one." "What do you want from me?" Celia asked, fighting the urge to cry. "Answers," Vincent snapped. "Who paid you to set him up?" "No one," Celia cried out, stepping forward. "He was dying in the street. If I wanted him hurt, I would have kept walking." "Vincent, doctor." Sterling interrupted, his voice tight. Vincent spun around, his coat flaring. "What is it? Aris!" The doctor held up a small vial of blood he had just drawn from the boy. He placed it into a portable centrifuge, checking the digital readout on a connected laptop. "I just ran a rapid tox screen. Leo wasn't just pushed, he was dosed. Tetrodotoxin derivative, a highly refined, slow-acting synthetic paralytic. It shuts down the motor functions first, then the respiratory system. It mimics a severe spinal injury." The room went dead silent. Tommy Bellucci cursed under his breath. Vincent's face turned to stone. "Someone poisoned my son." "Yes, doctor," Sterling said grimly, "and it requires precision. A dose this exact means it was slipped into his food or drink at least 3 hours ago. Someone close to him did this. Someone inside your house." Celia watched as the realization hit the Mafia boss. His inner circle was compromised. The men standing guard at the door suddenly looked at each other with suspicion. Vincent's empire was built on loyalty, and a rat had just tried to murder his heir. "Dad," a weak voice croaked. Vincent rushed to the table, his intimidating demeanor melting away instantly. He took Leo's small, pale hand in his own. "I'm here. Piccolo mio. Papa is here." "The lady," Leo whispered, his eyes searching the room until they locked onto Celia. "Where is the lady?" Vincent frowned, glancing back at Celia. "She's here." "Make her stay," Leo pleaded, his heart monitor beeping erratically. "The man with the cane. He said everyone in the house is bad. He said they all lie. Don't let her leave. Papa. She helped me." Celia froze. She remembered Leo's delirious words in the alley. The man with the silver cane. "Mr. Romano," Celia said softly, tentatively stepping closer to the table. "When I found him, he said a man with a silver cane pushed him out of a black Lincoln Navigator." Tommy Bellucci dropped his hand to his holster. "Boss, Simon has a silver cane. He handles the East Side collections. He drives a navigator. Vincent's eyes darkened with a murderous rage that made the room temperature drop. Simon was his uncle, his own flesh and blood. He turned back to Celia, looking at her not as a nuisance, but as an asset, a completely unconnected, untainted civilian whom his son inexplicably trusted. "You owe 70,000 to Mount Sinai," Vincent stated, his voice flat, emotionless once again. "Yes," Celia whispered. Vincent pulled out a sleek black phone and typed a brief message. A second later, Celia's cheap cell phone chimed in her pocket. She pulled it out. It was a notification from her bank. A wire transfer had just cleared. $70,000. Her balance was completely wiped clean. She stared at the screen, her mouth open in shock. "What? What did you just do?" "I just bought your life, Miss Jace," Vincent said, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of rain, expensive tobacco, and danger. "My house is compromised. I cannot trust my guards, my maids, or my own family. But my son trusts you." "I have to go to work tomorrow," Celia stammered, overwhelmed. "I have a life." "You had a life," Vincent corrected her softly, terrifyingly. "You saved a Romano tonight. That makes you a target. The moment Simon finds out you intercepted his hit, he will have you killed in your queen's apartment before breakfast." Vincent reached out and gently took Celia's cheap phone from her trembling hands, dropping it onto the floor and crushing it beneath his polished leather shoe. "You are my son's new nanny," Vincent declared, turning back to his men. "Tommy, lock down the penthouse. No one gets in or out. Celia sleeps in the adjoining room to Leo." "I didn't agree to this," Celia yelled, finally finding her voice. Vincent stopped at the door, looking over his shoulder. "You don't have to agree. You just have to survive. Welcome to the family." Suddenly, the lights in the penthouse completely cut out, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The heavy reinforced doors of the elevator chimed. Someone was coming up, and they weren't invited. The darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating like a heavy wool blanket. The only sound was the erratic, panicked beeping of Leo's heart monitor, running on its emergency battery backup. "Get down!" Vincent's voice roared through the pitch-black penthouse, before Celia could even register the command. A heavy, calloused hand gripped her shoulder and shoved her violently to the floor. The marble was freezing against her cheek. A split second later, the stainless steel doors of the private elevator blew inward with a deafening crack. The concussive force shattered the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Wind and rain instantly howled into the room, sending shards of glass raining down like lethal confetti. Muzzle flashes erupted from the elevator shaft, illuminating the room in strobing, terrifying bursts of yellow light. Celia screamed, covering her ears as the deafening roar of automatic gunfire chewed through the expensive leather furniture and plastered walls. "Tommy suppressing fire, cover the boy," Vincent barked. Tommy, Bells, Bellucci, and the remaining guards returned fire, their suppressed weapons emitting deadly, rhythmic thwips that found their targets in the dark. Heavy bodies hit the floor with wet thuds. Celia crawled blindly across the glass-strewn floor, her hands slicing open on the shards. She didn't care. Her only thought was the paralyzed 7-year-old boy lying helpless on the surgical table. She bumped into the metal legs of the table, reached up, and grabbed Leo by his ruined blazer, pulling him down off the table just as a spray of bullets shredded the mattress where he had been lying a second before. "I've got you," Celia gasped, pulling Leo's trembling body under the heavy mahogany dining table nearby. "Close your eyes. Leo, keep them closed." "Papa!" Leo whimpered, burying his face in Celia's chest. In the strobing light of the gunfire, Celia saw Vincent. He was no longer the composed, terrifying businessman in a Brioni suit. He was a predator unleashed. He moved through the darkness with lethal precision, a heavy Glock 19 in his hand. He didn't waste bullets. Every shot he took ended with an invader collapsing. "Reloading," Tommy yelled from behind a shattered granite kitchen island. "Two left on the flank," Vincent called back. Celia held her breath as heavy combat boots crunched on the glass, mere feet from her hiding spot. One of the hitmen was circling the dining table, his weapon raised, sweeping the area with a mounted flashlight. The beam of light cut through the dust and smoke, inching closer to where Celia and Leo were huddled. If the light hit them, they were dead. Celia looked around frantically. Her hand brushed against a heavy, jagged piece of the shattered crystal bourbon decanter that had fallen from a side table. She gripped it tightly, ignoring the sting as it bit into her palm. The hitman stepped closer. The flashlight beam swept over Celia's ruined boots. Without thinking, Celia lunged from under the table. She drove the jagged crystal deep into the unarmored gap behind the hitman's knee. The man roared in agony, his leg buckling. As he fell, his flashlight spun wildly, illuminating his face. Vincent materialized from the shadows behind him like a ghost, wrapping his arm around the man's throat and ending the struggle with a brutal, sickening snap. The room fell dead silent, save for the howling wind and the rain pouring through the shattered windows. "Clear!" Tommy yelled, kicking a weapon away from a downed body. The emergency backup generators finally kicked in, bathing the ruined penthouse in a dim, eerie red glow. The luxury apartment was completely decimated. Bullet holes tracked across the expensive artwork, and 6 masked men in tactical gear lay dead on the marble floor. Vincent dropped his empty magazine and slammed a fresh one into his weapon. He didn't look at the bodies. His eyes immediately swept the room. "Leo, we're here," Celia choked out, crawling out from under the table, dragging Leo with her. Her hands were covered in blood from the glass, but the boy was unharmed. Vincent rushed over, sliding to his knees in the ruin of his home. He checked Leo frantically, then looked at Celia. He saw her bleeding hands, the fierce, protective grip she had on his son, and the shattered crystal she was still clutching. The cold, dead look in the Mafia boss's eyes shifted, replaced by something Celia couldn't quite decipher. It was a profound, startling respect. "You protected him," Vincent breathed, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "I told you I wouldn't let him get hurt," Celia said, her voice shaking violently as the adrenaline began to crash. "Boss," Tommy interrupted, his voice grim. He was kneeling next to one of the dead hitmen, having pulled off the man's tactical mask. "It's Dominic. He's one of Simon's top enforcers. Simon sent his own personal guard to finish the job." Vincent stood up, towering over the room, the terrifying aura returning in full force. "Simon knows the poison didn't work. He knows Leo is here. Tommy, get the armored transport ready. We are moving to the safe house in the Hamptons. Tonight." "Wait," a voice croaked from the corner. "Doctor!" Aris Sterling emerged from behind the overturned leather sofa, dusting off his lab coat. He was pale, sweating profusely, and clutching his medical bag to his chest like a shield. "Vincent, you can't move the boy yet. The paralytic is still in his system. His heart rate is dropping again. If we put him in a bumpy transport, the stress will trigger a full cardiac arrest. Vincent turned to the doctor, his jaw tight. Then what do you suggest? Aris, I have an experimental counteragent in my bag, the doctor said quickly, his eyes darting around the room. I need to administer it intravenously immediately. It will flush the toxin from his receptors. Then he'll be stable enough to move. Vincent nodded curtly. Do it. Fast. Doctor. Sterling hurried over to the dining table where Celia was holding Leo. He unzipped his medical bag with trembling hands. Celia watched him closely. Something was wrong. Celia had spent the last 5 years reading people to survive. Working the graveyard shift at a diner in Hell's Kitchen meant knowing when a customer was about to skip out on a bill, when a drunk was about to get violent, and when someone was lying. Doctor. Sterling was lying. His hands were shaking, yes, but not with the adrenaline of surviving a gunfight. It was the terrified, guilty tremor of a man backed into a corner. As he pulled a small vial filled with a clear liquid from his bag, Celia noticed something else. Earlier, when the doctor had run the rapid tox screen on Leo's blood, Celia had seen him check his smartwatch. It had buzzed twice, a distinct vibration pattern. Just now, right before he suggested the counteragent, his watch had buzzed again with the exact same pattern. Why would a doctor be getting messages during a deadly firefight? Hold his arms still. Celia. Doctor. Sterling instructed, drawing the clear liquid into a syringe. This will pinch, Leo, but you'll feel better soon. Celia looked at the syringe. Then she looked at the doctor's eyes. They were wide, frantic, completely devoid of the detached professionalism he had shown an hour ago. Someone close to him did this. The doctor had said earlier, someone inside your house. No, Celia said softly. What doctor? Sterling snapped, his facade cracking. Girl, let go of his arm. I am a medical professional. I said no, Celia shouted, yanking Leo against her chest and physically blocking the doctor with her body. Celia, step aside, Vincent ordered, stepping forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. He needs the medicine. It's not medicine, Celia yelled, staring dead into Vincent's eyes. Look at him. Vincent. Look at his watch. He just got a message. The hitmen didn't cut the power to ambush you. They cut the power to cause chaos so the doctor could finish the job. The room froze. Doctor. Sterling's face drained of all color. He lunged forward with the needle, aiming straight for Leo's neck. He never made it. Vincent moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed the doctor's wrist, twisting it violently backward until a sickening pop echoed through the room. Sterling screamed, dropping the syringe. It shattered on the marble floor, the clear liquid burning a small, sizzling hole into an expensive Persian rug. Acid. Vincent slammed the doctor against the wall, lifting him entirely off the floor by his throat. Simon, Vincent whispered, his voice a demonic rasp. Simon paid you to dose my son. He threatened my family. Sterling choked out, his legs kicking wildly in the air. He said if I didn't give Leo the paralytic at dinner, he would kill my wife. The hit squad. They were just the distraction I was supposed to inject him with the acid during the chaos. Vincent's eyes were black voids of absolute fury. You broke bread at my table, Aris. You swore an oath to my family. Vincent, please, the doctor begged, tears streaming down his face. Vincent didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He dropped the doctor to the floor, drew his weapon, and fired a single, silenced shot into the man's chest. Sterling slumped against the wall. Dead. Celia covered Leo's eyes, burying her own face in his hair, her whole body trembling. She had just witnessed an execution. The reality of the world she had just been dragged into hit her like a freight train. Vincent stood over the body for a long moment. Then, he turned and walked over to Celia and Leo. He holstered his weapon and knelt down, gently prying Celia's bloodied hands away from his son. "The poison. How do we stop it now?" Celia asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "The paralytic Aris described was a lie," Vincent said quietly. "Leo wasn't poisoned with a synthetic tetrodotoxin. Aris just needed an excuse for why Leo was paralyzed so he could administer the cure." "Tommy." "Yeah, boss," Tommy said, stepping forward, pulling a small medical kit from his own vest. "Give him the epinephrine," Vincent ordered. Aris just sedated him with a heavy muscle relaxant. Simon needed Leo out of the way to stage a coup tonight, but he didn't want the boy dead until I was dead too. Aris was the fail-safe. Tommy quickly administered a shot to Leo's leg. Within seconds, the boy took a deep, ragged breath. The grey pallor in his cheeks began to fade, replaced by a healthy, flushing pink. He blinked, looking up at his father, and then slowly reached out, his fingers curling weakly around Celia's coat. "I can feel my toes, Papa," Leo whispered. Vincent let out a breath he looked like he had been holding for years. He kissed his son's forehead, then looked up at Celia. "You saw what he was, even when I was blind to it," Vincent said, his voice stripped of all its usual cold authority. "You saved him in the alley, you saved him in the crossfire, and you saved him from the traitor." "I just wanted him to be okay," Celia said, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. Vincent reached out, his large, warm hand gently wiping a smear of soot and blood from Celia's cheek. The touch sent a shockwave straight to her heart. It was a fiercely protective gesture from a man who destroyed anything that threatened what was his. "Simon is a dead man walking," Vincent said, standing up and pulling Celia to her feet. He didn't let go of her hand. "By sunrise, there will be no one left in New York who dares to speak his name. But this world, it is ugly. Celia, I forced you into it tonight." "You paid my mother's debt," Celia replied, looking down at their joined hands, then up into his dark, magnetic eyes. "You saved me too. You are no longer a waitress. You are no longer drowning in debt," Vincent declared, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that promised possession, protection, and something far more dangerous. "You belong to the Romano family now. As long as I draw breath, no one will ever hurt you. That is my vow." Celia looked at the ruined penthouse, the bodies, the shattered glass. Then she looked at the little boy holding her hand, and the terrifying, beautiful man who had just burned his own empire down to protect them. She didn't run. She squeezed Vincent's hand back. "Okay," Celia whispered. The storm outside finally broke, the first rays of dawn piercing through the shattered windows of the penthouse. The reign of Simon Romano was over before it began. And as Vincent led Celia and his son toward the stairs, a new era for the Romano syndicate was born, one ruled by a king who had finally found his queen in the shadows of an alleyway. If you were on the edge of your seat during this Mafia romance, hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a fierce, protective Mafia boss and a heroine who fights back. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling audio dramas, plot twists, and dark romance stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed with Vincent